School hallway buzzed with activity when it happened. Max Callahan, the undisputed king of Ridgeland High, had been watching the new girl for weeks. There was something about Emma's quiet demeanor that rubbed him the wrong way. She refused to blend in, refused to acknowledge the social hierarchy he ruled with ease. "Well, look who finally decided to show her face," Max called out, his voice slicing through the noise. His circle of friends instinctively formed around him like a living shield. Emma stood at her locker, organizing her books with slow, methodical precision. She did respond, something only a few noticed, but that slight act of acknowledgement was enough to stir Max's irritation even further. "Hey, new girl, I'm talking to you," he barked. The hallway fell silent, students sensing a confrontation brewing. Phones appeared in shaky hands, already recording what was bound to become the day's hottest piece of gossip. Emma turned, her expression calm and unshaken. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. "Yeah, actually," Max said, stepping closer. "You can stop acting like you're better than everyone else. No socials, no friends. What's your deal?" "I don't have a problem," Emma replied, her voice steady and calm. But something about that composure only fueled Max's growing anger. "See? That's exactly what I mean," he snapped. "That attitude. You think you're special, don't you?" Emma met his gaze directly. "Number, I think we're all special in our own way." The noise of the hallway seemed to fade as Max's hand sliced through the air. The slap landed hard against her cheek, the sound echoing off lockers and tile like a firecracker in a church. Everyone froze. They waited for tears, for a scream, for the expected reaction to such public humiliation. But Emma slowly turned her head back toward him, a red mark blooming on her skin. Then she smiled, just a faint lift of the corner of her mouth, but it was enough to make Max step back without realizing it. "Whatever, freak," he muttered, retreating, his friends scattering behind him in awkward silence. Emma stood alone, her fingers lightly brushing her cheek, as if considering what had just happened. The students slowly dispersed, whispering as they walked away, none of them noticing the older man standing at the far end of the hallway. He watched silently, dressed in faded jeans and a cap pulled low over his brow. Before anyone could catch a clear look at his face, he turned the corner and vanished like a shadow slipping into the past. 3 weeks earlier, Emma Stallard had arrived at Ridgeland High without fanfare. Principal Grady introduced her with the usual, "Please welcome our new student" routine. She nodded politely, gave no details about her old school, didn't mention why she moved mid-semester. She was polite but private, courteous to the staff, held doors, thanked cafeteria workers, but she spoke to no one unless spoken to. No TikTok, no Instagram, no Snapchat. In 2025, that was like being invisible. But it wasn't her online absence that made her an anomaly. It was her self-containment, the kind of presence that unsettled people without saying a word, like a calm lake that might hide something deep beneath. Students whispered behind her back. "She doesn't even try to fit in," some said. "She acts like she's too good for us," others added. What they didn't say aloud, but definitely noticed, was that Emma was black. One of the very few black students in a mostly white school. And she didn't try to compensate for that, didn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. She simply was. And that seemed to bother Max more than he could articulate. That night, Max tossed in bed, unable to sleep. The slap replayed in his head, again and again, but not the part he expected. It wasn't the action. It was the smile. The way she looked at him, like she already knew something he didn't. He scrolled social media. A few clips of the incident had surfaced, tagged with his name, her name. Some comments joked, others weren't so kind. But oddly, the clips kept disappearing. Someone was reporting them, almost immediately. Max texted Tyler, his best friend since elementary school. "What's going on? Who's taking these down?" Tyler replied, "Dude, I don't know. Someone's watching out for her, fast." Max laughed to himself, but something deep in his stomach didn't join in. The next day was colder, not in weather, but in atmosphere. Coach Landry, who usually greeted Max with a slap on the back and a "Let's go, Callahan," barely looked at him. Teachers avoided eye contact. Kids mumbled excuses to not sit with him at lunch. He caught whispers as he walked by. "Did you hear about her? Her file's locked. She's connected to someone." He tried brushing it off until Bethany, his chemistry partner, asked to be reassigned. "Tiema's cousin goes to my church," she offered as an excuse. "I just don't want trouble." "Emma doesn't have a cousin," Max said, before realizing he had no idea how he even knew that. That afternoon, Max opened his locker and found a cream-colored envelope. Heavy stock, no name, sealed with wax. Inside, a single card. "We remember." The handwriting was graceful, almost artistic. He crumpled it and shoved it into his pocket, but the chill in his spine didn't leave. Elsewhere, in the faculty lounge, Mrs. Holloway, the guidance counselor, stared at her computer screen. She had tried scheduling an intake meeting with Emma 3 times. All politely declined. Now, out of professional curiosity, she pulled up Emma's file. What she saw made her sit back in her chair. A red warning. "Access restricted. Federal clearance required. Contact Lieutenant Column D. Whitaker, Department of Defense Liaison." She'd never seen anything like it. She called in Coach Landry. His military background made him the go-to when bureaucratic red tape popped up. He read the screen and grew very quiet. "This is above our pay grade," he said. "This is Pentagon stuff. I've seen similar on base. Intelligence family. Maybe protective custody. Someone high up." In the equipment room of the gym, 2 janitors were whispering. "I'm telling you, that girl's connected," said Frank, who'd worked at Ridgeland since the 80s. "I saw the man watching her. That's Stallone." "Like Rocky? That's Stallone?" "He adopted a little girl after Katrina. Kept it private. I saw him in Biloxi. Never forgot those eyes. And she's got 'em." Coach Landry, walking past, dropped his clipboard at the mention of the name. Didn't even pick it up. Because in that moment, everything started to make sense. The silence, the smile, the reason why Max should have never raised his hand. Not to a girl trained not just in martial arts, but in patience, control, and legacy. And not to the adopted granddaughter of Sylvester Stallone, a man who built his life on knowing when to fight and when not to. Max didn't know when the air had shifted around him, but by Thursday morning, Ridgeland High no longer looked at him the same way. The teachers had grown distant, the students uncertain. He walked through the cafeteria, expecting his usual seat at the center of the popular table, but found it half empty. Tyler looked up from his tray, mumbled something about having to study for a pop quiz that didn't exist. Max waved it off with a forced chuckle, sat down anyway, but the silence around him was deafening. People stared when they thought he wasn't looking. Others didn't even bother to look away. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. He caught fragments. "That's him." She didn't even hit back. Stallone, for real?" A group of sophomore girls stopped talking as he passed. A pair of juniors avoided eye contact and turned down another hallway. Even underclassmen, the same ones who used to carry water bottles for him during track meets, now ducked their heads and pretended to check their phones. Max clenched his fists in his jacket pockets and kept walking, jaw tight. Later that day, in chemistry, Bethany didn't return to the lab table. Instead, she sat with a new group, offering only a glance in Max's direction that held neither anger nor fear, just distance. Mr. Harris barely looked up from his roll sheet, didn't acknowledge the change. No one said anything. At the end of class, Max approached her, voice low. "What's this about? You think I'm dangerous now?" Bethany glanced at her notebook, then up at him. "I think you didn't realize who she is," she said quietly. "My dad's in law enforcement. He says we're supposed to stay out of it." "Out of what?" he asked, voice rising, but she didn't answer. Just closed her books and walked out. He slammed his locker closed harder than he meant to, drawing a few startled glances from students down the hall. That's when he noticed something wedged under the edge of the door. Another envelope. Cream-colored again. The same weight, the same elegant cursive on the front. No name, no markings. Inside a note card. This time, it didn't say much, just an address, written cleanly. 4 p.m. tomorrow, and nothing else. He stared at it for a long time. The address wasn't familiar, but the tone of the message wasn't a request. It was a command. The next afternoon, Max showed up at the location, a nondescript brick building on the edge of town, near the industrial park, the kind of place you drive past without ever really seeing. A simple sign on the door read, "Summit Martial Arts Academy." He entered cautiously. The front lobby was clean, minimal, wooden benches, framed photos of students in crisp white uniforms, black and white portraits of martial arts legends on the wall. There was no receptionist, just silence. Then a voice from deeper inside. "Lockers to the left. Shoes off before the mat." Max hesitated. The voice didn't repeat itself. He followed the instruction, removed his shoes, and stepped barefoot onto the mat. The gym was larger than it looked from the outside. Brightly lit, spotless. A few young students were finishing warm-ups in the far corner, under the guidance of a woman in her late 30s. But at the center of the room stood a figure that made Max's heart slow and his breath catch. The man wore a navy tracksuit, arms folded. He didn't need to say a word. Sylvester Stallone didn't look like the version of himself from the movies. He was older, yes, lined face, silver at the temples, but he carried himself with a quiet strength that filled the room. Not the exaggerated, muscle-bound bravado of Rocky, but the kind of presence that said, "I've seen more than you can imagine, and I'm still standing." His eyes fixed on Max. He didn't move, didn't smile. "You touched my girl," he said, voice low, deep, and calm. "That's a problem." Max swallowed, unsure what to say. I didn't know who she was." Stallone took one step forward. "That's the thing about character, son. It's not about how you treat people when you know someone's watching. It's how you treat the ones you think don't matter." The words hit harder than any punch. Max looked down, cheeks flushing with something close to shame. Stallone didn't rant, didn't threaten. He just studied him for a long moment, then said, "Come back Monday. 4 o'clock. Wear something you can move in. You've got a lot to unlearn." With that, he turned and walked off the mat, leaving Max standing alone. He didn't ask questions. He didn't argue. He left quietly, unsure if he'd ever breathe normally again. Meanwhile, inside Ridgeland's administration building, Principal Grady sat behind his desk, pale-faced and sweating. The school board had received a video package earlier that morning, an anonymously compiled, time-stamped montage of bullying incidents involving Max, footage from security cameras, student cell phones, even faculty phones. Some clips were short, Max shoving a freshman into a locker, mocking a girl with a stutter, intimidating a teacher after a bad grade. Others were longer, more damning. The slap, of course, was the closing note. Grady watched in horror as each clip played, knowing that every second was a nail in the coffin of his own career. In the guidance office, Mrs. Holloway sat beside the school's IT director, both staring at Emma's locked file on the screen. It hadn't changed. Still restricted. Still federal clearance only. "I think we should call," she said finally. "No," the IT director said, eyes wide. "Unless you want to deal with men who don't introduce themselves and don't ask for coffee." Rumors had already started circulating in the teacher's lounge. Emma's name was whispered like myth. Some said she was in witness protection. Others thought she was the child of a federal judge. But the most popular theory, the one that made people lower their voices and look over their shoulders, was that she was connected to Sylvester Stallone. No one could confirm it. But when Coach Landry overheard a student joke about Rocky's granddaughter, he didn't laugh. He didn't say a word. He just nodded slowly, like someone who'd seen enough to believe it. At that same moment, Emma sat in history class, staring out the window. She hadn't said a word about the incident, not to teachers, not to students, not to administrators. She hadn't posted online, hadn't filed a report. She hadn't needed to. The world around her was already changing. Max, meanwhile, returned home to find his father, Judge Callahan, pacing in his home office. The elder Callahan had received the same video package the school had. He had also received a call from the Mississippi State Board of Education asking for a statement. "What the hell did you do?" he hissed at Max, slamming his phone down. "They've got you on tape 12 times. And now there's talk of your expulsion." "Dad, I didn't know." "You didn't know? That's your defense? You didn't know you weren't supposed to hit a girl?" Max had never seen his father lose his composure. It scared him more than Stallone had. That evening, a quiet ripple moved across social media. Someone, no one knew who, had leaked the video of the slap again, this time embedded inside a longer video essay titled, "When Silence Speaks Louder Than Violence." It included slow-motion clips of Emma's reaction, her refusal to retaliate, her quiet strength. The video was picked up by a small but influential education blog, then a parenting page, and before midnight, it had crossed 1 million views. The comments flooded in. Former victims of bullying, teachers, mothers, retired veterans. A groundswell was forming. Emma hadn't said a word publicly, but somehow, without a single interview or post, her silence had become a statement. Max sat in his room in the dark, watching the video on loop. His face, his anger, his slap, replayed for the world. But what haunted him wasn't how he looked. It was her. The way she stood still, the way she smiled, the way the world seemed to tilt in her direction. And deep down, past the shame and the embarrassment, he felt something else. Awe. The morning of the assembly, Ridgeland High was tense with a kind of electricity usually reserved for pep rallies and homecoming games, but this was different. Mandatory attendance, no sports practice, no club meetings. Every entrance watched by campus officers. Something big was coming, and everyone knew it. Max sat near the back of the auditorium, shoulders slouched, jaw set tight. His father sat beside him, his usual confident posture now stiff and grim, lips pressed into a thin line. The man who once told news cameras that his son was the embodiment of leadership and moral character now refused to look at him. The house lights dimmed at exactly noon. Principal Grady took the stage in a dark gray suit that made him look smaller than usual. The microphone crackled. Then came the first words, simple, clear, no build-up. Ridgeland High has a problem. A hush fell over the crowd. Grady continued, his voice heavier than anyone had ever heard. A culture of intimidation and silence has taken root here. For too long, we've let certain students operate without accountability, and I take full responsibility for the role I played in allowing it. The large screen behind him flickered to life. What followed wasn't just footage. It was a reckoning. The same clips from the anonymous file, one after another, a brutal highlight reel of Max's worst moments. Laughter at a girl with a stutter, a shove in the locker room, veiled threats to a faculty member, and finally, the slap. The sound echoed through the speakers with a clarity that made people shift in their seats. But it was the image of Emma's calm, steady gaze after the slap that froze the auditorium. That small smile, that unshakable stillness. Max shrank lower in his seat. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. His ears burned. His father muttered under his breath, "This is a damn witch hunt," loud enough for nearby students to hear. He began to rise, ready to march toward the stage, but just as he did, a door opened quietly near the front. All heads turned. The man who stepped in moved without hurry, without apology. Wearing a simple leather jacket, dark jeans, and the weight of decades in every stride. Sylvester Stallone walked into the room like he'd been there before, like he belonged. But it was Emma who followed him that changed the air. She didn't wear anything flashy, just jeans, sneakers, and a navy blouse. But she walked with that same composed energy she had carried since day one. As she approached the stage, the students collectively leaned forward. Grady stepped back, offering the microphone without a word. Stallone didn't approach the podium. He stood beside it, his arms crossed, saying nothing. Emma adjusted the mic once, then began. "I didn't want this," she said, voice calm and even. "I wanted to finish school quietly, make a few friends, get to college. Just be normal." Her gaze swept across the crowd, then paused on Max. "But sometimes, normal isn't given to you. Sometimes you have to make a choice about how you respond to things you didn't ask for." She exhaled slowly. "The day Max slapped me, I could have defended myself. I've trained since I was 5. I could have embarrassed him in front of everyone. I could have broken his wrist before he even saw it coming." A low murmur moved through the room. Emma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. But I didn't. Because real strength isn't what you show when you're angry. It's what you choose when you know you can hurt someone and decide not to. She paused, and you could hear the faint hum of the auditorium's lights. The room was so silent. "My grandfather taught me that," she continued, glancing toward Stallone, who gave her a single, steady nod. "People think because he played fighters, he solved everything with punches. But the hardest thing he ever taught me wasn't how to throw a punch. It was how to not throw one." Her words were hitting deep. Even the teachers, even the parents who'd come to observe, were still. I let Max hit me because I wanted the truth to come out. Not just about him, but about all of us. Every time you saw something wrong and said nothing. Every time a teacher ignored a whisper in the hall. Every time a parent made a phone call to cover a mistake. This isn't just about bullying. It's about enabling. She looked directly at Principal Grady. It's about leadership, and the lack of it. Grady nodded, face pale. Emma turned back to the students. I'm not pressing charges, not because Max didn't deserve consequences, but because I want him to understand that redemption starts where the violence ends, and because I believe he can be better. She looked at him again. This time, her eyes softened. If he chooses to be. For a moment, the room was still. Then slowly, someone in the front began to clap. A few more followed. Then the sound rolled through the auditorium like a wave. People rising to their feet. Students, teachers, even Coach Landry, who wiped his eyes with his sleeve as he stood. Max's father sat frozen, then stood quickly and left the auditorium without a word. Max stayed in his seat, unable to move. The next week was a blur of consequences. Max received a 30-day suspension, mandatory counseling, and 100 hours of community service, specifically tied to youth mentorship and anti-bullying work. His spot on the basketball team and student council was revoked pending review. His father, under pressure from the school board and local press, resigned from his seat, citing family priorities. Emma returned to class like nothing had happened. She remained quiet, kept to herself. But people greeted her now, not out of fear, but respect. Some students sat with her at lunch, hesitantly at first. Others gave her space. She accepted both with the same grace. She never acted like a hero. She just kept showing up. 3 months later, on a rainy Saturday morning, the Summit Martial Arts Academy held its regular youth class. The hardwood floors gleamed under fluorescent lights. Children between 6 and 12 followed commands with varying degrees of coordination. Emma moved among them, correcting stances, offering soft encouragement, never raising her voice. She wore a simple GI with a third-degree black belt tied neatly at her waist. Her movements were precise, almost graceful. She paused beside a 7-year-old boy named Carter, gently adjusting his feet. "Balance first," she whispered. "Everything else comes later." The door chimed. Emma looked up and saw Max standing awkwardly in the entryway, wearing sweatpants and a plain gray t-shirt. He looked different, hair cropped shorter, expression less guarded. He waited for her to approach. "Your grandfather said I could come," he said, "if the offer still stands." Emma studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Uniforms are in the back, first size that fits." Max hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something?" She nodded once. "That day in the hallway, why didn't you stop me? You could have, you know." She knelt to help Carter retie his belt, then looked up. Because revenge continues cycles. Discipline ends them, and someone had to choose different. Max stood quietly for a moment, then moved to help a younger student pick up dropped pads. For the rest of the class, he stood on the sidelines, mimicking movements, bowing when instructed, silent but present. At the end, the children lined up and bowed. One little girl whispered to Emma, "Is he going to be like you one day?" Emma smiled. "That's up to him." Outside, under the shadow of an oak tree across the street, a man in a leather jacket and baseball cap stood watching. His face was weathered but calm. Stallone nodded once, then turned and walked away. No words, no grand gestures, Just the quiet satisfaction of a legacy passed on, not in power, but in restraint. Inside the studio, Emma gathered the mats. Max helped her fold the last one. She didn't say anything, but he did. "Same time, Monday." She nodded. "Don't be late." Then added, almost to herself, "The hardest opponent you'll ever face is the person you used to be."